this is probably the most important concept for all of negotiation, which is about leverage. You need leverage in order to negotiate effectively. And the way I like to explain leverage is this acronym you might have heard of called BATNA. BATNA stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. It's basically communicating the idea of how willing are you to walk away from the deal that is presented. If the answer is you can walk away, no problem, it's not going to be that much of a cost or damage to you, then you have the upper hand in negotiation. However, if you want the job offer or if you want anything that desperately, you are going to be vulnerable. This is a very important concept because it might be a bit counterintuitive. The way you win any argument is by not needing to win, right? So the idea of BATNA is the most advantageous alternative that you have if the negotiations fall through and an agreement cannot be made. And so that means that you need to have a really good backup option in order to have strength when it comes to talking about that core negotiation. And this is a really big issue when it comes to people who really, really want, for whatever reason, a job offer at a company. So let's contrast two different people. One is someone who just got laid off and they're actually an immigrant. And so they're on a visa and they have 2 weeks left until they have to leave the country and go back to their home country. So in that case, yeah, I mean, understandably, you are going to be very, very stressed out. The stakes are extremely high. If you are not able to find a job and come to an agreement on the terms, you are literally going to be forced to leave the country. The stakes are extremely high. However, you contrast that to someone who has 3 job offers and they're already employed. They're working at a company where they have a decent manager, a decent profile, decent compensation. So in that case, you're going to be chilling, right? Like even if one of the job offers doesn't work out, you have 2 more job offers. And even if all of them don't work out, you can go back to your job. You're negotiating from a position of strength. And the other thing I'll mention here is that perception does matter a lot. So even if you don't feel like you have a really good option, if the other party, the counterparty, if they think that you have a really strong backup option, then that itself could be a very powerful negotiation tactic. And so we'll talk about that later on in the course too. How much information should you reveal or should you not reveal in order to strengthen the perception of what your BATNA is? So if I were to formalize that a little bit, I would argue that if we consider the soup of leverage, like what goes into this really critical dish, which is leverage, there are 3 things. One is time, second is information, and third is options. So if you only have a week or 2 to make a decision, you really your back is against the wall, as opposed to if you have infinite time, you already have a job and you're just trying to get a better job if the right one comes along, then you have tons of leverage through time. Information is what we talked about in the previous lesson. You want to know what is standard for your role, geography, your skill set. The more information you have, the more power you have when it comes to defending your ask. And then finally, probably the most important is going to be options. So you have 2 apples here. If one apple doesn't work out, you can go to the other one, right? The idea is that you want to be able to say, hey, I don't need you. There are other people, other companies that are willing to take me on, and I have, here's what I have to offer, and you can take it or leave it. And if you come in with that kind of attitude where you have plenty of options, then you have the really good core for leverage. And one other thing I just want to comment on here is around a lot of people watching might be interested in, at some point, doing a startup. And if you do a startup, then there's a decent chance you might need to go talk to a venture capitalist. A venture capitalist is someone who gives you money in exchange for ownership in the company, and the idea that then you are working really hard to build a big company, and then that's how they get a financial return. And there's a very, very similar narrative that plays out with raising venture capital as to what I just described with negotiation and leverage. Here's the core idea. If you are relying on one investor, then you are going to be taken advantage of. That is a sad reality. Is that if you trust one investor too much and you give them all the information and you tell them that I only want to work with you, you will get very poor terms in terms of your valuation cap, in terms of how much money you're able to raise, and governance, and many other things like that. VCs are famous for being like lemmings, where one person does something, the other people will follow. So if one venture capitalist finds out that, wow, here's another VC who I respect a lot, who's also interested in you, they immediately become interested. And I'll tell you a personal story about this. With Taro, we did raise some money. And there was one VC firm, I'm not going to name them, where I emailed them, I would say like 3 or 4 times, and I had some connections there. So I tried to use my connections to like get a reply. I got nothing. I got ghosted. And then another venture capital firm, which is really well respected, they got back to me and said, hey, we are really interested in Taro and we want to invest. We may be part of it. And so I sent an email back to the original fund, the original VC. And I said, hey, we have this offer. Would love to talk and make sure that we can explore all the options before we commit to one firm or the other. And then immediately, within 12 hours, this person got back to me and said, oh, I would love to talk. Right? So the point of that story is that when you come at it with the position of strength, that, hey, I have many other options. I'm not just waiting on you. The train is moving. You're either on the train or off the train. Then that gives you a lot of power and people will be attracted to that. So I think VCs in particular are very much a follow the crowd kind of people where they don't really make up their own mind. They're all just driven by what other people think. Companies are a bit more independent minded because they actually have their own evaluation system, and whether you pass the interview or not. That's an easier problem, I think, compared to what VCs deal with, which is trying to make sense of a small team or like very little data about how the company is doing. They're trying to project about 5 years out or 10 years out, the valuation and like how fast it'll grow, all that is made up for the most part. And so VCs do have a hard job. But the same principle applies where in the absence of many options, you will be taken advantage of. And the consequence of that is that you really should work hard to line up everything and make sure that you are talking to many people and you have time to make the decision.